Our next session is a leader's discussion on the topic, Are You Cyber Secure for the Digital Era? Hear from the cybersecurity leaders and their actionable strategies in preventing the second crisis emerging from data and cyber threats. Please join me in welcoming the speakers for this session, Dr. Zulfikar Ramzan, Chief Digital Officer, RSA Security, Jen Easterly, Head of Firm Resilience and the Fusion Resilience Center, Morgan Stanley, and Phil Armstrong, EVP and Group CIO, Great West Lifeco, Inc. And our chair for the session, Akhilesh Tuteja, Global Co-Leader, Cybersecurity, KPMG. Akhilesh also heads the risk consulting practice for KPMG in India. He's passionate about developments in the area of information technology and how these can help businesses drive smarter processes and effective outcomes. He's a notable speaker on cybersecurity and its implications on an enterprise business and has played an active part in developing security and privacy frameworks for the banking industry in India. Akhilesh, the stage is all yours and it's over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Shreya, for that lovely introduction. I'm pleased to have with me a wonderful set of speakers today. While I'm missing NASScom in action, being in person at Grand Hyatt in Mumbai, but I'm very happy to talk to possibly the better set of panelists than I would have managed to get in one room. I'm pleased to be having the company of some of these best minds in the world of cybersecurity. So here is my little bit of thank you note to everybody to taking time from different parts of the world, Phil from Canada to Jen and Zulfikar from the United States. We are joining today with a number of different type of experts, and one of the things which I am finding exciting about is we have not only different industry representation, but also the range of past experience they've got. So let me introduce Jen Easterly. She is the head of firm resilience for Morgan Stanley, and she has a wonderful experience prior to joining Morgan Stanley, which spans across military and government. I'm also joined by Phil Armstrong, who's been a CIO for the longest period I have known somebody. He finished 43 years long service of being a CIO, and today he completes his glorious career. Amongst other interesting things, Phil has worked in 49 different countries. I just can't imagine how global one can get. Last but not the least, we've got Zulfikar Ramzan, who's the Chief Digital Officer for RSA, a company which is known for security at its core. And more importantly than that, I think Zulfikar eats, lives, breathes security. He has got over 50 patents in his name, so you can imagine the depth of technical expertise which he brings here. I'm sure you're all as excited as I am about the conversation you're going to have about how can you be cyber secure in a digital era, where everything is ever connected, everything is always on, and you are omnipresent and connected with the technology the way you like. Before I request our panelists to talk about their experience and how they can help us shape our thinking and the future with respect to what cybersecurity could mean in the new era, let me start with a very simple thing, which I'm sure all of you have heard at some point. Many years ago, I heard a phrase saying that there are only two kinds of companies in the world. One, those who've been hacked, and the others who don't know that they've been hacked. I don't personally subscribe to that because the world isn't that strange as we may imagine to be. But I have my 2 cents to this. I believe that there are two kinds of security professionals in this world. One who follow what I call the cigarette smoking syndrome, and the other who follow what I call the toothpaste syndrome. And what I mean by the cigarette smoking syndrome are the people who kind of, the way you have the statutory warning on a cigarette pack which says that smoking is injurious to health, use cybersecurity as a mechanism to say that how bad can it get? And you better have cybersecurity in place, otherwise you'll have damaged lungs, livers, and all kinds of cancers you can get. On the other hand, I also know the cybersecurity experts who I call the toothpaste guys. And those are the guys which actually always say that, and if you look at just a thought experiment in your mind, you wouldn't have seen a toothpaste ad where it says, if you don't put toothpaste, you will have dirty, rotten teeth. On the other hand, most toothpaste ad will tell you that if you use a toothpaste, you'll have pearly, shiny teeth. So I'm the one who actually belong to the toothpaste category, where I think cybersecurity can actually mean a lot more value to business then it's just being a hindrance or doing certain things. If you don't do, the world will come crashing. Although the World Economic Forum report continues to highlight cybersecurity as one of the top five risks. In fact, it's one of the largest man-made risks, and it's appearing after some of these risks like environmental damage and so on that. KPMG, in its Global CEO Outlook survey report for the fifth year, has reported cybersecurity as one of the top five CEO priorities. And I repeat, it's not CEO risks, it's the CEO priority. So as much as the world thinks it's a big risk, I think the CEOs of today's world believe that cybersecurity is a huge opportunity. Cybersecurity is a huge enabler to drive digital trust and create an environment where we can deliver our business results in a much more secure and a much more trusted way. So with that kind of thing, and I'm sure there's going to be a very interesting conversation as we follow this one, let me invite Jen first to share with us. Jen, please tell us, as you see today's digital world evolving, what kind of cyber threats which we see today, and what is that which we should be considering as we develop cybersecurity strategy in the digital era?
Great. Well, thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here with you and our panelists and on such an important topic. You know, when we talk about whether we are cyber secure and the importance of cybersecurity and then the risks that you just mentioned, I think it's important to just foundationally understand the cyber threat landscape. You know, we all know that the digital revolution of the past several decades has really realized the promise of economic growth and innovation, but all of the increased connectivity has brought great peril in some ways. More platforms, more endpoints, more devices has really increased that surface area, the attack surface, as we call it, you know, and significant and growing vulnerabilities that threaten not just our security, but our privacy, our infrastructure, and arguably our economy, our global economy. So when I think about trends over the past decade or so at the strategic level, I think there's three major things that have shaped an increasingly complex and dangerous cyber threat landscape. First of all, this idea of proliferation. You know, the number of states with these offensive tools and weapons out there has grown to many dozen and are likely to increase further. You know, secondly is this idea of commoditization. You have a criminal marketplace with cyber tools and these types of weapons that has essentially become democratized. And that, again, has fueled this sort of widespread proliferation of cybercrime. And we've certainly seen that from a financial services perspective. And then finally, as a consequence of both of these, you have this sort of hybridization where you have cyber threats becoming increasingly blended. So nation states behaving like cyber criminals empowered with nation state tools. And all of this together really speaks to the last trend, which is weaponization of cyberspace. You know, we've seen state actors, non-state actors using cyberspace largely with impunity to threaten our security, both online and off. So we've seen these major breaches that we're all very well familiar with. We've seen targeting of industrial control systems and utilities. We've seen stealing of large amounts of capital from financial institutions. And then, you know, most recently with this massive supply chain attack that was revealed in December, we saw the potential undermining of the global technology supply chain. So, you know, even as the attack surface has grown virtually with all of these aspects of our lives, we also have, you know, a lack of norms and what's responsible behavior on cyberspace. We have competing technology standards. We have lagging security awareness. You know, all of this makes our jobs much harder because there's much more to protect. And of course, the move to remote work and COVID only exacerbated these trends. And so, you know, the very reality of this is our jobs have become increasingly difficult with the increasingly complex cyber landscape. And so, you know, that really kind of implicates the question of what it truly means to be able to be cyber secure in such a landscape.
That's interesting. At the same time, very scary, as I hear, because you talked about the three converging trends, and clearly the state actor and commoditization of cybersecurity tools, and then weaponization. There are some very dangerous phenomena. What it certainly tells me is that, you know, anybody who's aspiring to be building a career in cybersecurity must be someone who's serious and has multidisciplinary skills. But at the same time, I also think that when you do a job which is so much more complex and difficult, you get paid well. So those of you who are aspiring to build a career in cybersecurity, there couldn't be more exciting thing here than it is. Let me turn to Phil. Phil, what do you think in your world? How do you describe to be cyber secure in a digital era? Phil, I think you got to unmute. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was having difficulty with my mute button there. It wasn't working. Could you repeat the question for me again, please?
Yeah. So, Phil, given that the world of cybersecurity is becoming so much more complex and the threat landscape has expanded multifold, in your view, what does it mean to be cyber secure in today's world?
Yeah, that's a controversial topic, being cyber secure. I think we've spent a lot of time educating boards and regulators and business executives that really you cannot be 100% cyber secure. I think what the people that work in cybersecurity and in the technology professionals have come of age. We've matured and we're very pragmatic. And we've been sending out a message to our internal customers and our external customers that we are doing everything that we can to protect valuable assets, whether that's customer data or whether that's brand reputation, IP, critical services, or even employee data. And we're trying to mitigate as much as possible any threats. And marginalize any business interruptions. But the reality is that people that are walking around saying that they are cyber secure don't really know the facts. I think what you have to do is try to assess the risks that your organization has and try to minimize those risks with selective and prioritized investments the best that you can. You have to be very diligent around your monitoring and your response capabilities. And you also have to build in redundancy and capabilities where you can pivot very quickly. And then the final part of that puzzle really is to spend a lot of money and time and effort on awareness and education, changing the culture of your organization, right through from your suppliers and your employees and your customers, to be risk aware and to speak up quickly and to report things that they see suspicious, but to just increase their awareness around what some of the threats are in terms of phishing and malware and things that you see, social engineering, that are targeted towards employees. Employees and people often are the entry point, as well as weaknesses in technology. So that's kind of how I would answer that, in terms of be very pragmatic and prioritize your investments, have realistic expectations, and try to minimize your attack surfaces and minimize your risks as much as possible. But to walk around with an expectation that I am completely cyber secure, I think is an unrealistic expectation.
That's interesting. Thank you so much for giving us that pragmatic view that don't even try to be 100% cyber secure. I'm sure that's the right way. But some of these practical advice on how do you minimize the threat landscape, and also the issues which Jen also talked about, the supply chain and then the people and culture things. I'm tempted to ask the same question to you, Zulfikar, because I think you have a very different perspective to all of these things, coming in from providing the solution to some of these challenges. How do you describe this problem?
Well, first of all, I have to say that it's a daunting task to follow, Jen and Phil after such remarkable answers. So I'll try my best to kind of add more and maybe complement some of their answers versus trying to come up with a brand new paradigm. So first, I just want to point out, in my role, I kind of play both sides of the equation. On the one hand, I'm part of a cybersecurity vendor, but on the other hand, part of my role is also protecting our own internal infrastructure and figuring out how to protect ourselves, manage risk, et cetera. So I get to see it from both angles. And I want to highlight a couple of key points. So one, we've used the term threat landscape multiple times in the last few minutes. And I think it's important to recognize that the threat landscape isn't this monolithic one-size-fits-all entity. We use the term threat landscape as a singular term, but every organization has a unique landscape of threats that matter most to that organization. Now, as a result of that, I think when you think about that from the perspective of risk, and I'm glad that Phil brought it up, because ultimately for me, risk is about understanding what's critical in your environment, understanding the business impact, and then juxtaposing that against what we know about the likelihood of bad things that could happen in our environment. And the reason I bring that up is because the term risk is often also frequently used, but only a small select number of people actually understand what risk means in more detail and know how to reason about risk correctly. Now we get to the third point, which I think we've all agree upon. There's no such thing as cybersecurity or information security. There's only degrees of insecurity, if you will. And so our goal is, how do we get that degree to be to a place where we actually feel the risk is acceptable for our environment? Now, I'm kind of belaboring this point around risk and about insecurity because ultimately, the one advantage we have over threat actors, the one critical advantage we always have, is we know what matters more to our business than they do. They may know about things we don't know about. They may know about this latest 0 day that we may not be aware of, but we ultimately know what's important to our organization. And if we're not accounting for business criticality, if we're not thinking about business impact, there's a good chance that we're going to be missing something fairly major. And so to kind of wrap that up, I think one thing we're seeing, Akhilesh, in the world moving forward is that, to me, that bridge between cybersecurity and business has never been tighter. You can't be successful in managing cyber risk if you don't understand your business and vice versa.
I think you put a very, very profound and impactful positioning in a very simple words. If I were to kind of repeat for what I've understood is, we've always believed that threat actors, the hackers, and those people who are adversaries have a lot more advantage over us because they can spray paint, they can push a lot of things. But I think you put it in a very simple way that the deterministic knowledge of the value of our business assets, the way the organization have, hopefully those threat actors and adversaries don't have. So we got to take and play on our strength and advantage of that. That's really, really interesting. But that also kind of begs another question, which maybe I'll turn to Jen if you're okay. In the world of cybersecurity, and I will call it cyber insecurity, as Zulfikar has repositioned the thing for us, the risks are immense. The threat landscape is very, very large, and one can never feel that you have done enough, because we also heard from Phil that you can never reach 100% cybersecurity. It's kind of an impossible target. So what is the right way? At what point would you say, yeah, we've done enough? Are there any thoughts and practical advice around how do you say that, yeah, this is good enough?
Yeah, I don't think thinking about it in those terms is necessarily that helpful, just understanding what we're dealing with. I mean, I would totally reinforce what Zulfikar was saying in terms of this is really about risk management. We're never going to get to a place where we think we're good enough in terms of cybersecurity. And so, you at the outset talked about this idea of two companies. I think that was a phrase sort of coined by a friend of mine, Dmitry Alperovich, who founded the company CrowdStrike. And, lately we've been discussing, what's the right approach in this world where you have these increasingly sophisticated adversaries. And it kind of goes to your question about, what's enough in terms of investments. But I think we really need to be in a posture now where we assume that bad things are going to happen, rather than, assuming that we can actually prevent bad things from happening. I mean, that's what we want to do, obviously. But we really need to assume that bad things are going to happen. And so while we're managing risk, we also, the other R word that I think is hugely important here is resilience. So building a capability that says, I'm going to do everything I can to prevent, but really what I need to do is to build a capability to understand these threats, understand, to Zulfikar's point, our own networks and critical assets, because that would be an advantage over the adversary, but then build the right analytics to detect malicious and anomalous activity as soon as possible. And then perhaps most importantly, build a capability to respond as rapidly as possible and to recover, so that you can mitigate these inevitable threats and risks to your networks, to your clients, to your reputation. And that's really about building resilience. And that's essentially the capability that we've been building at Morgan Stanley over the past couple of years. In some ways, it assumes that bad things will happen. It assumes a breach, and it allows you to build a posture that gives you a much better chance of mitigating the risk and the harm to your clients. And that, to your ultimate question, what are the investments that are most important there? Obviously, there are huge investments in technology, and I know Zulfikar will talk about AI/ML, and there's huge analytics investments. But to me, the most important investment that we make is in our people, ensuring that we have the right talent to be able to do all of these tasks across the organization. And also to build the right culture. And part of that culture is the cybersecurity awareness. So you have that vigilance that's necessary across the board for everybody to realize that this is and can
Okay, looks like there's a network issue here. All right, so if I were to replay a couple of very interesting points which Jen made is, one is, as much as we may like to believe that we can stop bad things from happening, they're going to happen. So you got to find a way to balance not just protection but also resilience. And I've seen that also the number of people I've worked with is that in the past people have not prioritized enough of resilience, and people have not prioritized enough of what kind of investment they should make when bad things happen. Hey, we got Jen back here. I was just trying to summarize what you kind of finishing, but happy to get back to you and complete what you were saying, Jen.
Yeah, sorry about that. Unstable internet connection here. I was just saying to your question about investment, obviously, we're all looking to invest in the right vendors and the right technology and the right analytics. But at the end of the day, the most important investments are in people, getting the right talent to lead our cybersecurity teams and our engineering teams, and then really building the right culture. And I think part of that is, at least, one of my passions is making sure that we have a highly diverse workforce, because I think that's important to be able to solve the toughest problems.
Thank you so much. I did try to summarize the two very interesting points which came out of your summary. One is on it's important for us to plan for stopping the bad things from happening, but also equally important is that when they happen, how do we deal with that and resilience around that? I think that was very interesting. The second one, which you talked about around culture, diversity, and having people, getting people to do the right thing when they need to. I'll come to that one in a bit, Jen. So if I were to kind of turn to Zulfikar, because you gave a very interesting pointer. While Zulfikar, you talked about the risk, but I've also heard enough about artificial intelligence, machine learning. They're all new technologies, and I'm sure they've got tremendous potential to do great stuff. But they're also having the tremendous potential for the bad actors to do bad stuff to us at speed and scale. So, what do you think is the role of machine learning technologies or AI in general in the future, and what can we, as the people who are responsible for protecting, can learn and make use of?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to say, I want to point out the irony of Jen was talking about resilience, and in the middle of that, lost network connectivity. But I think, what's interesting is if you look at what happened from that point onward, a lot of other earlier platforms like this would not have as gracefully let Jen back on. If you look, there was a pretty good job, I think, of allowing you to kind of get kicked off, but quickly get back on the network without too much interruption. And I think that's an important lesson for us to all take away.
That's personal resilience.
Right, exactly. It was knowing how to click the button quickly enough, and we've all been there. I think fortunately this is the sign of the times that we live in, and I think you raise an important point, which I think dovetails into your question, Akhilesh, around AI and ML. So it does have to start with talent at a critical level. And there's an expression that I actually heard from a customer of ours, actually one of your competitors, Jen, who said, a fool with a tool is still a fool, right? Which means that you can invest money all day long in great technology, but if you don't know how to use it properly, then there's really no point in making that investment. And I think with AI and ML, there are a few key points I want to highlight. So the first key point is that even though the terms have gotten a lot of recent attention, quite frankly, in the cybersecurity space, the vendor community, these technologies have been deployed now for a decade and a half plus in production environments successfully. I know we were doing it in the banking sector circa 2005, right? And that's before anybody was talking about it. I think what worries me right now is when we get so focused on the tools, we forget about the actual business problem that those tools are meant to solve. And it's important not to lose sight of that. I mean, so for many years, we weren't even talking about AI and ML because nobody really cared how we solve the problem. They just cared, what are you doing to manage fraud? What are you doing to manage risk? How are you making me more resilient, et cetera? The second key point is that when you come to things like AI and ML, it's important to realize that they're very much garbage in, garbage out. And you can have 57 data scientists with 100 patents come up with clever algorithms, but if they're using bad data in the first place, they're not going to be able to make meaningful inferences from that data. And I'm amazed how many times I see remarkable algorithms fed with very poor data, and then everyone is shocked when the outcomes don't look good. The way I like to look at it, it's like you can't make good wine from bad grapes, and that's a California analogy, and as you can imagine me being here, but I'm sure there's a similar analogy that works across the board in any part of the world. And in that vein, I think to me, you've got to think about any technology in the context of its overall role in your ecosystem. So, Jim talked earlier about the idea of being able to know your environment. There's a great quote by Rob Joyce, and Rob Joyce used to be the head of NSA's Tailored Access Operations Unit. In 2016, He gave a talk at the Using Enigma conference, and I would highly encourage you to look at the talk. You can find it online. By the way, Rob Joyce is now the acting director of, I think, the NSA. He's been has a really wonderful career in the space, and he said, and I quote, he said, "If you really want to protect your network, you have to understand your network. You have to know the things, the devices, and what's going on inside that network." Now, just take that a step further. It's really about visibility into your environment. You can't get resilience unless you can actually see what's happening. And once you see what's happening, then only then can you start to apply interesting analytics on that data. You can start to glean meaningful insights, and then you can take actions against those insights. And coming back to where we started, if you take the right set of actions against the insights you glean from the visibility you have, those actions in turn should intelligently reduce your risk. And you can see this very nice triumvirate of key technologies that have to come together to make everything work.
I just can't try and attempt to summarize all that which you said, but I picked up a couple of things. The first one, I picked up that a fool with a tool is still a fool. If you allow me the luxury of extending further, I would say maybe a fool with a tool is a more fool, because I remember I used to use this analogy that if you're driving to the cliff, driving it faster will only kill you sooner. So I think maybe a fool with a tool can actually kill more people sooner. But the second one, the bad grape can't create good wine. I think that's the power of data. And I think if I were to kind of replay one message more strongly, is we as security practitioners also have to deal with not just more data, but also good quality data, because I've seen a lot of people being obsessed with the billions of events and all of that kind of feeding into those source systems and others, but the quality and what kind of do it. And the third one, which you talked about, is really knowing what you're trying to solve, because I think that's very, very, very important. Thank you so much. This is a topic on which we can talk for length, but let me just come to a here and now problem, and I'll invite Phil on those comments. And let me, after all the discussion we've had around the world, one of the problem which most people in India providing services around the world continue to deal with is that when you're working in India, you're actually working for the world, and therefore you are ending up dealing with regulations which apply not just in one country like India or US or Canada, but many, many, many countries around the world. When you are a technology service provider, you're providing service to a bank which is regulated differently, to a healthcare which is regulated differently, retail which is going to deal with privacy issues, and many, many others. So Phil, you've been dealing with many of these things for many decades. What would be your suggestion for people who work in multi-country, multi-jurisdiction, multi-industry kind of model to build a framework or a model to develop cybersecurity in the operations?
Yeah, it's been evolving quite significantly over the last few years. You know, if you look at some of the macro trends that we're seeing governments look at data as an asset, and we're seeing governments putting legislation in place where they want data residency. And so while we can get economies of scale and centralize data and apply compute power to it, the technology is not the barrier. It's a lot of the legislation and government's opinions on data being an asset and being a sovereign asset. So you're seeing a lot of data residency, which is sort of fragmenting the fabric of solutions that technologists want to put in place. And then you see different regulations coming out, like GDPR, which are fining organizations, and the different maturities of regulation across either countries and even within countries, whether it's provinces or states, there's differences in the regulations there too, and the standards that are required. And so if you're running an enterprise, which is a global enterprise, it is very, very challenging. The way that I've seen organizations respond to this is pushing cybersecurity out to the intelligent edge. I mean, it used to be you dug a moat around your data center and protected your data center. And now with multiple clouds and hybrid cloud environments, integrating cloud environments into your static data centers as well. The network that you use is now the internet. And so pushing as much as you can in terms of cybersecurity and defenses to the intelligent edge, wherever that edge is, and extending it out and localizing your threat and defenses, your surface areas, minimizing, lot of companies are going with large suites of products because they're avoiding the challenges with integration, and certainly integration across different boundaries. And so there is a role to play for smaller, more innovative companies to come into this fabric and these ecosystems. But the larger companies are going with larger suppliers with fully integrated suites, and really not allowing criminals to exploit those integration weaknesses and those boundary weaknesses. And so it is a challenge. There is no simple answer to this, but certainly the internet has been a godsend and an absolute quagmire of problems all at the same time when it comes to knitting together international operations that are running under different regulators, different rules, and different maturities.
Fascinating, and I think I agree with what you described, that you got to look at the overall ecosystem, and the whole issue of data residency is not going to go away. We got to find a way to work with it. Jen, I promised you that I'll come back to you because you intrigued another point of my attention about the people dimension, the security culture, how do we build it? Let me present a problem which I kind of hear from many people, and it's also the problem which I have been dealing with, is many organizations tend to deliver cyber awareness program, telling people what to do, what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. I'm also coming from the principal belief that just telling people what's right doesn't really change behavior and culture. And I always say that if knowledge were to translate into action, I should have been 6 kilos lighter. I exactly know what I should be doing. I should know that I shouldn't be eating all that chocolate which I've eaten today, and I should have exercised this morning. I didn't. Despite knowing everything, maybe I can write a book on how to be healthy. I'm not. So what has been your learning? What would be your advice to say, how do we really work towards building a culture or getting people to change their behavior when it comes to cybersecurity?
It's a great question. And it's a tough one, right? Because in a big business, everybody's focused on the businesses that are creating revenue. And cybersecurity and technology is often seen as a cost center. So the good news is, I think most big businesses, certainly in finance, they have really gotten serious about understanding this being a potentially existential risk. And so we have very robust programs around cybersecurity education. We send simulated phishing emails out to our employees, essentially to gamify the learning experience. And we do education just on a constant basis. Within our Fusion Center, when we were back all together before the age of COVID, we would bring a lot of our employees in there so that they could actually see in real time the type of data that we are detecting and monitoring, and how actually, we are protecting the firm firsthand. And we also talk to them about the threat landscape. But I think the most important thing we say is not all of the trends or all of the statistics, but just one, which is, about 93% or more successful cyber attacks start with a phishing email. And when you realize that, you understand that you are responsible at an individual level for your own safety and security, just given how vulnerable we all are, but also potentially the safety and security of your business. And so just sort of constantly reminding folks of this importance. There's some gamification you can do, but then people understand that this is a very real issue, particularly in the age of COVID, which, to my earlier point, is a great example of a hybrid threat. COVID started out as a global pandemic, but was taken advantage of by highly entrepreneurial cyber threat actors in an explosion of fraud, using things like COVID-themed phishing emails and business email compromise. And so just continually explaining to people what the risk is, how they can educate themselves and their families, and just building that culture of vigilance, I think is incredibly important. I think the last thing I would say, separate from the education piece, is also taking a look at what is your operating model. And it goes to Phil's point about how are you able to successfully do this in a global operating model. And so, what we've chosen to do is actually to bring together our cyber response capabilities, with our technology incident capabilities, with our business continuity management capabilities and our exercise capabilities and our intel capabilities into one global operating model with locations around the world, so that we can really emphasize being as proactive and vigilant as possible to deal with the highly complex cyber environment. And so that has also been important, so that we are educating people in real time around the world.
Thank you so much, Jen, for that lovely answer. I know it's a very difficult challenge, but the way you put it as a holistic approach to not just telling people what to do, but also making them realize the impact. And I think the statistic which you made, even though it's another statistic, was very sticky, that 93% of the large attacks will start from a phishing email. So you got to kind of nip it at the bud. So the more you train and more you get that right. So my advice, again, coming as a consultant in this space, is that if you solve that part of the problem, which you can do with a combination of using people's awareness, technology, and detection capabilities, I think a lot of problem gets solved. I'm fascinated with the quality of conversation here. I'm sure I can go on and on and on, but we've got just a few minutes left. So what I would like to do is I'd like to make the most use of your time here. So thank you so much. You've been a great support in this wonderful panel. So let me turn to Zulfikar today. Zulfikar, I'm going to ask you a very difficult question, but if you can provide us a short answer, what would be your one advice to a CIO or a CDO on how to become cyber secure? Not perfect, we know it's going to be, but better than what we are in today's world.
So I think that's a great question, and I think that it's a question that if you look at it the wrong way, it has an implicit bias that often occurs in our industry. For many years, we often saw a structure where your CISO was reporting into your CIO, and I think that that's something that we have to change at a fundamental level, because I think the reality is that we've seen now, as Jen pointed out, as Phil pointed out, cybersecurity issues are now an existential threat to a business. I mean, you could literally see a business vanish or lose a tremendous amount of money within a short period of time if they get it wrong. And in that way, I think cybersecurity has now become elevated, not just to a conversation between the CEO and the CIO and the CTO. It's really a conversation between the CISO and the rest of the executive suite in a partnership combination. And I want to highlight an interesting example that I can think of. I was talking to one of our customers, a major bank in Asia, and he was a CISO, and he was telling me, Zulfikar, I'm the person who's responsible for finding all the problems. I find vulnerabilities here, I find an issue there. My problem is I have no authority to fix the problems I find, because I don't own the infrastructure. The CIO owns the infrastructure. I don't own the application that might be owned by a line of business. And so here I am pointing out all these problems, but I can't seem to get anything done. And this kind of dovetails with something that Jen said earlier. It's often about governance from a top-down level. We forget about the importance and role of governance at a top-down level. If you want to fundamentally change an organization, you've got to change the culture, which has to happen from the top all the way down. Now, the way they solved the problem in this particular bank is that the CISO was able to arrange a tabletop exercise where we went through a simulated breach for the organization. He was able to get the CEO and the CIO and all the other C-suite members to be part of that exercise. And they all had a role to play. You'll be surprised how quickly these major breaches involve every part of the company. And the CEO realized that he had to do something to effectively create the right culture. So then he created a set of managed objectives for each of his direct reports that included now a security component and a risk management component as part of that objective. And then effectively the playing field is leveled. So I want to kind of highlight that example because to me, it's not just about one person giving somebody else advice. At a fundamental level, it's about developing a partnership among the right stakeholders. And in this day and age, every one of us is a key stakeholder for the success and longevity of our business.
That's more than what I had asked for. I think you kind of turned it on its head, and starting from the elimination of bias and how do you kind of not just offer advice. Phil, coming to you, if you were to give one piece of advice to a CISO, what would that be?
Yeah, so maybe a little bit of controversial piece of advice for a CISO, but not to think of yourself as a technology executive, but to think of yourself more as a business executive and a risk executive. And the reason I say that and the reason I encourage CISOs to think of themselves as business executives is because the first thing that they really need to do to be effective is to learn the business of the company that you're in. Why is that important? Because you need to understand what are the crown jewels? What are we trying to protect? Where is the most prioritized protection required within the organization. And it can be different for different companies and different industries and different operating models. And you also need to be very pragmatic. But in order for CISOs to be effective, they have to be supreme communicators. And it's no good talking to the executive team or the board in technology speak. You want to be outcome based. You want to talk to these people in a language that they can understand, and so that it's the language of business. It's the language that they understand in how they operate their business. If you're fighting for capital and investments to mitigate risks, you have to be outcome based. You have to explain to the business what these threats can do to them and their reputation and their operational stability and performance. And you can't do that by throwing a whole bunch of acronyms and tools and technology gobbledygook speak at business executives. So they have to get into the headspace of being a business executive that's managing risk and just applying technology in order to activate those defenses and those mitigative actions. But really the most prolific CISOs don't really talk too much about technology. They talk about weaknesses and risks and areas of opportunity for investment and how that can benefit the organization, the customers, the shareholders, make the board sleep a little bit easier at night. Those are the most successful CISOs. And so when I talk to CISOs, that's the angle that I try to move them towards, so that they can become better communicators and affect the culture within the organization.
Thank you. So I think you're coming back to the point, the business value is very important, but Jen, you also kind of raised the point about cyber being an existential risk for the business. So if I were to ask you, what would be your advice to the top of the house, the CEO? What would you say?
Well, first of all, I think Zulfikar's and Phil's comments were terrific and worth reinforcing. So, this idea of partnership, I often say cyber is a team sport, and it truly is a partnership, not just technology. It has to be seen as a partnership with the business. And so to Phil's point, you can't be speaking nerd speak to the business. You have to speak to them in business terms and risk management terms to really create that partnership. So CEOs know, and I think many CEOs really know, this is a CEO board level issue, an existential risk to the business, and they take it very, very seriously. There's a lot of buzzwords thrown out there in the industry. One is zero trust. We didn't talk about that. But, at the end of the day, the most important thing I think that leadership needs to form is trust in your security team. So they feel like they have a direct line to raise issues with you, that they are empowered, that they are resourced to be able to build teams with the right people, the right culture, the right technology to keep your business safe. And I think thankfully most leaders and CEOs are beginning or have realized that now. But it's important to continue to invest again in your people, in your culture, and your technology to get this right. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know we are really out of time, but I could continue to talk to you about wonderful experience you've got, the wonderful insights. Let me first start thanking NASSCOM to bring this platform and bring some of the best panelists for us today to talk about it. I would like to thank all my fellow speakers today for the amazing insights they've shared, and very practical, very insightful, succinct outcomes in terms of what the kind of experience you have, which we can learn from. The kind of topics we have covered, right from use of technology to understanding the culture of the organization, artificial intelligence to looking at the business value of the asset, many, many great points. I think I can't attempt to even summarize, but I've had a number of learnings, and I'm sure each one of you watching us today would have also enjoyed this panel as much as I did having this conversation. With that, thank you very much once again, and back to you, Shreya.
Thank you, Akhilesh and the panel for this super topical session and the valuable takeaways. From the interesting paradigms of cigarette smoking warnings and toothpaste claims with respect to cybersecurity, and how it's on the top 5 of CEO priorities and not just any threat. The fact that nobody is 100% cyber secure stood out for me, and how every organization has a different threat landscape, and how the threat landscape itself is no single monolithic structure.